Welcome to Project Foodie. Hey guys, my name is Daniel Holzman. I'm the chef and owner of the Meatball Shop in New York City.
I take after my grandmother. My grandmother was a huge fan of tiny balls.
I didn't say it.
You've just selected my broiled halibut with white wine, potatoes, leeks, cherry tomatoes, and clams. This whole meal is gonna take about 30 minutes. It's got 5 steps, and I'm ready to cook. You definitely don't wanna cook this fish for anybody that has an allergy to shellfish, because you could potentially kill them. But other than that, this is a real crowd pleaser. I mean, it's absolutely delicious. And if you happen to have an allergy to shellfish, it actually works really well without the clams. So you could omit that step. So the first thing you need to do before we begin is gather all of the ingredients and tools you're gonna need. Proper preparation is everything. In the professional kitchen, we call it mise en place. It means having everything you need at a hand's reach right when you need it. You're gonna need the following tools. I got a pot that I'm gonna use to boil our potatoes. We have a wide bottom pan with a lid that we can use to braise our fish with all of the vegetables.
It needs to be oven safe as well.
We have a knife and cutting board, a slotted spoon,
A fish spatula, or any spatula will do.
I have a medium-sized bowl that I'm gonna use to wash our leeks. So I have a butter knife.
Or any household knife will do just fine.
It's my favorite trick. I really love that one. Measuring spoons. I think it's really important, whatever we set up our station, to have some assorted spoons for tasting our food, cooking with, stirring. We're gonna be using wine in this recipe, so I have a wine bottle opener. Any chef will tell you that you never ever wanna cook with any wine that you're not willing to drink, because if it's not delicious enough to drink it, then why would you wanna flavor your food? So before I get started, I'm gonna pour myself a small glass of wine. And I encourage you to be very careful with your knife if you happen to be drinking as well. Cheers. It is dry white wine. I didn't know it was a dry white wine until I tasted it, but I can confirm that this is dry white wine. You're gonna need the following ingredients. I have these beautiful fresh halibut fillets, and I can tell they're fresh because when I smell them, I get a faint smell of ocean. They're translucent, they're firm to the touch, and they're not kind of sticky or mealy. This is a dish that would work so well with cod or snapper or bass. There are so many fish that could taste great with this preparation. I just happen to love halibut when it's in season. It's one of my favorite fish. It's a little bit pricey, but it could definitely be substituted if there's something better that's local to you. And whenever I'm in the country further from the ocean, I love to use trout, which cooks up really well with the same method. Some fresh flat leaf parsley. We have small clams. I love manila clams. I just like small tender clams, and you can see that these clams are kind of opened up a little bit. And what I want to do is I just kind of give them a little tap with my knife, and you can see they retract and actually close up and stay closed, which is how you know that they're still alive and really, really fresh. We have some Yukon gold potatoes, a great big leek. We have some fresh cherry tomatoes.
We'll need some white wine.
Unsalted butter. Salted butter is great if you're buttering toast, but when I'm cooking, you know, it's really hard to gauge the salinity of my dish if I'm adding salted butter. So I like to cook with unsalted butter, and then I add the salt separately. Olive oil. And whenever I cook with olive oil, I like to use an inexpensive, light flavored olive oil. The more expensive finishing oils are absolutely delicious, but they have a very strong, often bitter and spicy flavor that can overpower what you're cooking. The ubiquitous kosher salt. I prefer to use kosher salt because it's inexpensive. What I feel is really important is to always use the same brand of salt. I like to use the same brand of salt because each brand has kind of different size salt crystals, and when I grab a pinch, I want to make sure I'm grabbing the same amount of salt. So this recipe has 5 simple steps. First and foremost, we want to get our oven preheated to broil. We want to slice our potatoes and get them cooking in a pot submerged in water. Step 2, we're going to cut clean, and start cooking our leeks. Step 3, we're going to wash our clams and cut all of our veggies, and we're gonna season our fish and get ready to cook. Step 4,
Layer ingredients in the pan and broil.
and step 5, we're gonna plate, eat, and enjoy. This cook-along system is based on the way that I train cooks in my restaurants. We cook everything together. So I'm gonna be here with you for every second of the process until your meal hits the plate. Feel free to hit pause, rewind, or slow it down whenever you need to. For step 1, we wanna get our oven preheated to broil. We wanna slice our potatoes and get them cooking. Okay, get our oven preheated to broil. And we're gonna cut our potatoes, submerge them in our pot with water, and start them cooking. For this dish, I think these potatoes are a little bit big to cut just into rounds for bite-sized pieces. So I'm gonna cut them in half first. And what you wanna do is just cut your potatoes in half and then slice the halves into 1/2-inch semicircles. When I cut these potatoes, I like to slide my knife from the front to the back so that as I'm cutting through the back, the front is already cut. If I cut them like this, the potatoes tend to stick to the knife and then they make a mess on my cutting board and it's a little harder to pick up into my pot. So I've got my sliced potatoes, and what you're gonna do is just submerge them in cold water. Whenever we cook potatoes, we like to cook them starting in cold water and bring them up. Otherwise, what happens is potatoes are really dense, but when they cook, they're really fragile. And if you plunge them into boiling water, the outside begins to cook before the inside is fully cooked, and they tend to fall apart and get really mushy. So by starting them in cold water and cooking it all, the potatoes come up to temperature at the same time as the water, and they tend to cook evenly and have a great texture at the end and not fall apart. So I can put these on the stove over a medium heat, coming up to a simmer.
The potatoes should take about 15 minutes, and we're gonna check them halfway through because we wanna make sure they aren't coming to a boil. We want them to stay on a simmer.
My oven is preheating to broil, and that's it for step 1. So for step 2, we're gonna cut, clean, and start cooking our leeks. Leeks are in the onion family. They're a really delicious vegetable. They grow through the earth, and you can see that they tend to collect a lot of dirt inside. The white of the leeks is really tender, and the greens, we discard them. They can be really tough and bitter. So what I do is just kind of like shaving it like a pencil. I just cut away at an angle, and I get rid of the tough outer greens, and I'm left with the white. We can cut those directly in half, and you can see that there are all these layers, and inside the layers, there's lots of dirt. So what we can do is just cut off the bolster on the bottom, and then I'm gonna cut the leeks into strips so that I've got the leeks in thirds. And then we can turn this way and cut again so that I get nice square pieces. Whenever I cut anything, I always make my longest cut first. So the leeks are long, I'm cutting those long sections first, and then I turn around and I cut this way. If I were to cut this way first, I end up with lots of little rings, then I've got to make lots more cuts. So the most efficient, fastest way is always start with the longest cut. And because the leeks are really dirty and they grow up in a sandy environment, the best way to wash them is the same way I would wash lettuce. I put them in a bowl, and I'm gonna completely submerge them in cold water. The leeks are gonna float to the top, and the sand is gonna fall to the bottom.
Gently agitate the leeks with your hand.
And provided that I lift the leeks out of the water, all the sand will remain in the water. A big mistake everybody makes is that they wash the leeks and then you dump them into a strainer and you dump the sand back on top and then they're dirty again. So I just want to avoid that and lift them out. And if you actually look at the water, you can see that there's tons of sand just in the bottom, but the leeks are nice and clean at the top. It's mad sandy. So my leeks are washed. And I'm gonna go ahead and get these cooking in a nice shallow pan with butter. I love this pan because this is what I'm going to cook the leeks in. Then I'm gonna add the rest of my vegetables. I'm gonna broil directly in this pan. And then I'm actually gonna serve it right in this pan because I think it's very beautiful. It's gonna look rustic and gorgeous. So I lift my leeks out of the water, being careful not to agitate the sand and get any of that in there. Those go right in. And a little bit of water is fine because it's just gonna help them to break down and cook. And then I'm gonna add my butter. I'm really generous with the butter for this dish. I don't cook with a lot of butter. I use olive oil mostly, but when I use butter, I love the flavor and I'm not shy with it. So rather than, like watch my calories and have a little bit of butter all the time, I just won't eat any butter and then I'll use a lot of butter when I finally do. And this is gonna be so great because we're braising these leeks with butter and white wine, and that is one of the classic combinations. So I can get these right on a medium-high flame.
For approximately 3 minutes.
I'm gonna let them break down a little bit, and then I'm gonna add my white wine and cook them further. So once my butter starts to melt, I'm just gonna mix everything around so that it's coated and I don't have any dry leeks hitting the pan that might start to burn. Just like when I'm cooking onions, if I want to get color on these, I won't add any salt. But if I want to make sure that they sweat and they get no color, this is a great time to season. I'll put just enough salt to draw out some of the water in the leeks so that they don't start to burn. Whenever I'm cooking something that has seafood, like clams, clams are inherently salty. So I want to be careful with my salt. I can always add more salt, but too much salt will ruin a dish. So I'll always start with just a little bit of salt. I'll season them and get them going. And then at the end, I'll taste my broth and finish. So my potatoes are just beginning to come up to a simmer. I want to make sure that they don't boil. If they boil like crazy, the agitation of the water will break the potatoes apart, and I want nice pieces of potato.
So I'll lower the flame under the potatoes so that they just simmer lightly for roughly 7.5 minutes. My leeks, the same, on a nice medium flame, and those will cook for another 8 minutes.
I can take a second here to just kind of clean up. If I'm done with the butter, I can put it away. and organize myself for my next step. We've got our leeks cooking in butter, and it's time to start step 3. Step 3, we're going to wash our clams and cut all of our veggies, season our fish, and get ready to cook. Our clams have a little bit of sand on them, so I'm just going to agitate them, submerged in cold water, and lift them out into a separate bowl. And when my clams are in cold, fresh water, not salt water, they close up, they clam up, because they don't really like fresh water. And if any of the clams are opened after being submerged in cold, fresh water, it's a good sign that the clam has died and it's not alive, and I want to go ahead and discard those. I only want to cook with live clams. I'm not worried about the clams being bad because I can smell, it smells just like fresh seawater. A little tiny hint of sea, but otherwise almost imperceptible. If I've got a bad clam in here, I mean, it's gonna smell really, really strongly, and what I wanna do is individually smell every single clam until I find the culprit, and I wanna discard that one. If I'm cooking something brothy with clams that have gone bad, one bad clam will ruin the whole broth. Isn't that the saying? One bad clam? No? Something like that. My clams are clean. I've got some fresh parsley here, and I'm just gonna chop a few sprigs. Whenever I cut parsley, I always start really big chopped on the leaves because I like some big pieces of leaves. And then as I get closer to the stem side, I cut it into smaller pieces because I don't love to get big chunks of stem. But I like to cook really rustically with my parsley. I like some big pieces. I'm gonna go ahead and season my fish. I've got these beautiful pieces of halibut, and I'm just going to lightly season them with kosher salt on all sides.
Step 4, layer ingredients in the pan and broil.
So our fish is seasoned, our parsley's chopped, our clams are clean. What we're gonna do is take our slotted spoon and we're actually gonna drain the potatoes out of the water, and we're gonna put them directly into our pan with our leeks. And I could tell that some of them are just beginning to fall apart. They're fully cooked. And what's gonna happen is I'm gonna mix these around so they're coated in the butter and the leeks. I'm gonna lay them here, add my white wine, and I can smell that immediately. What we can then do is we can build our halibut right on top. We have our cherry tomatoes, which we can layer in. And these are just gonna roast under the broiler, get nice and brown on top and release their liquid and juice into the vegetables. We can take our clams and we just wanna put them upright. So as they open, they broil, releasing their flavor, all their juice into our stock. And taking a little bit of extra time to place these carefully is gonna pay really great dividends when we pull this out of the broiler and all of these clams are opened up beautifully, calling our name. There's nothing better than white wine, leeks, butter, and clams. It's one of the all-time best sauces. And then we could just sprinkle our parsley over the top and place our pan right under the broiler to cook. And then I'm gonna drizzle some olive oil right over the top of my fish, around over the tomatoes and clams, just to make sure that everything has a nice light coating, which is gonna help it cook up in the broiler and get nice and golden brown. And what we're gonna do is just slide it under the preheated broiler to cook. And this is gonna take about 8 minutes in the broiler. Hopefully the warm vegetables underneath are gonna cook and steam the fish from underneath while the broiler broils the clams opened, broils the fish from the top, and roasts the tomatoes. A broiler is an often underutilized cooking method where I'm actually cooking underneath the fire. So the fire is on top, and in some ovens, you know, in gas ovens, that's on the very base, the drawer of the oven. In some of our more modern ovens, they have a separate either electric or gas broil at the top. So depending upon your oven is where you're going to place the pan. You just want to make sure it's directly under the fire. So basically there are two types of heat. We've got convection heat where the fire heats up the air gets hot and rises up. And then there's radiant heat where it's this intense direct heat that's coming from the fire and like radiating through heat waves and just like broiling the top of your fish or your meat. And it gives it that beautiful like grilled flavor that I love so much. And you will too. So while that's all cooking, we can clean up, get our plates, set our table, and get everybody ready to eat. This is the type of dish that I love to cook at home. I love cooking one-pot meals. I love rustic Mediterranean food, you know, the peasant cuisine of people that, you know, live in an area that just has amazing produce. Like I could just see something like this being cooked in the south of France. If I'm choosing a wine to drink, I will always, you know, open a bottle of wine that I'm drinking and then cook with that same wine, provided I'm not using a whole bottle or it's not overly expensive. I don't always drink an entire bottle of wine when I open it, so I can afford to use a little bit for the fish. This is a dish that is absolutely perfect for a first date, for your fiance, for anybody that loves great food, for the type of classy person that would drink warm white wine with an ice cube in it. The thing is that when I think about clams, I think about something that's really fancy, and the person that's eating this would never suspect that this is a 25-minute, one pot, super simple dish that anybody can cook. It's really foolproof. When it comes out of the oven, it's gonna look like you were slaving over it for hours. So I think this is just an absolutely great dish to cook if you wanna impress somebody. The only thing more delicious and classy than white wine and ice is white wine, ice, and seltzer, because everybody knows, it's so funny, like something like a wine spritzer has like a bad connotation, and we think about, like, you know, middle of America, someone drinking wine spritzers in the mall or on like a cruise or something like that. No offense, ladies. However, you go to the south of France and there are like French people drinking wine spritzers for sure because they're absolutely delicious. May God bless wine spritzers in the French. There's like nothing more refreshing.
Now's a great time to catch up, clean up, or kick your feet up.
So step 5, everything has been cooking and it's just time to plate it up, eat it and enjoy. For a dish that's this beautiful, I would go ahead and serve it in the pot that I cooked it in because I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And I would serve it family style. It's a rustic fish dish with clams and tomatoes. I don't think you want to mess with it. You put it right on the table. Whenever your food is this beautiful and you feel compelled to take a photograph of it and throw it on Instagram, we really appreciate it because it lets other people know and it lets us know that you enjoyed what we were doing together. The halibut is still really moist in the middle, but it's fully cooked. It's so fresh and it has such a subtle flavor, but it's not overpowered by all the vegetables. Everything really complements each other. And then the clams have just opened up so that they've seasoned the broth with their clam juice, but they're still really tender and not chewy. When you overcook clams, they can get really rubbery. I think that this is just a perfect summer afternoon dish. Those cherry tomatoes are like molten lava bombs, like delicious molten lava bombs. You don't know whether to spit them out or swallow them for fear of like permanent damage to your esophagus. I would eat this every single day, all summer long. I would be so healthy and so beautiful. People would really be my friend if I made this all the time. I hope you've enjoyed this Project Foodie cook along, and I hope you'll join us for more.